update for search.
There are ways to say that without
director as the stakeholder feedback.
So don't be
I
surprised.
got material from Cozy Davis.
There's like very specific exceptions, like for example, like an accident. Like that's pretty much it. Yeah, no, I
There we are. How'd Bible study go?
agree.
Good.
Your brother doesn't do. I don't know what
Good evening. I'm very jealous now, having come from the CPS board meeting last night, to discover that their board president has a gavel and uses it with great authority. So, but I got the big voice. So we just do what we can with the gifts God gave us. Let's do a quick roll call, please. Yusuf Ahmad is an expected absence. Debbie Elsa, thank you. Terry England, also an expected absence. Christine Fisher, Mike Graham, present. Tony Hobson, yet another expected absence. Barry Lindgren,
Here.
thank you. Micah Cameras,
Here.
and Torlin O'Neill.
Here.
Odell Owens has a board retreat of his own that he's doing. He had to leave early in the practice for it. Cheryl Rose,
Here.
Laura San McGrath,
Here.
Pastor Tate,
Here.
and Vanessa White.
Here.
Thank you very much. That brings us to agenda approval. I want to make two small adjustments to the agenda. After public comments, I'd like to insert about 10 minutes to debrief last night's joint CPS CPP board meeting. And then between numbers 5 and 6, following Toylin's update on the search, what I'd like to do is update you with respect to stakeholder feedback that we've received. And my guess is that'll be another 10 minutes, which will shave into the executive session time a bit, but I think we'll have ample time there for the project that will occupy us. So with those two changes, I ask for a motion to approve the minutes, the agenda, in case others have other alterations in them that they'd like to see made.
So moved.
Thank you, Vanessa. Second? Pastor Tate, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed or abstaining? So on a motion made by Vanessa White, seconded by Pastor Tate, the agenda was approved as noted, which brings us to the minutes. I understand from Leslie that the minutes that were circulated were incomplete, and the minutes at your place are the correct minutes. Do you want to draw our attention at all to the?
Debbie has a couple of the items.
Okay, but I believe you've incorporated them, Leslie?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so the first one is on page 2 of the minutes at your place, and it's the second paragraph. Next to the last sentence, it begins, the coaching cohort which is brought today to the board for a review of a motion and subsequent action, as well as an update on the joint CPS and CPP board meeting. So that's the change that I'm suggesting there. On page 3, and this is a question that Leslie and I have, and it's a written issue. Currently, it's under 4.5.2, coaching cohort for approval. The second bullet, currently CPP is projecting that they will run 3 cohorts at a time with a maximum number of participants within each of these cohorts at 30. So we're questioning the number. Is it 30 or is it another number? So that's to be clarified.
No, Brittany here to clarify it. So.
The last one that I had is on the last page, number 8. In the draft that you got, the confirmation motion was left off, and this is the motion that we passed. The motion was made by Deborah Alsop to confirm Sally Westheimer as the CPP interim executive director, and seconded by Cheryl Rose. The motion was unanimously approved. So that's the most substantive of it.
Yes, I should say. I caught that as well, but I couldn't remember who did what, so thank you very much for
Well, Leslie knew
reconstructing that.
who did what.
Good.
So,
So how do we want to handle the open item with respect to nailing down those numbers in the cohorts?
unless anybody here at the table has the number, the suggestion that Leslie and I had was to get that actual number from Brittany when she returns and highlight that.
Can we simply approve the minutes knowing that we're going to look at that number, and so then Christine, you look worried.
Well, the minute should be a reflection of what was discussed, not
Right.
what potentially the current numbers are. It needs, so if what was discussed was a question as to what the numbers are, then the minute should reflect the question, and then answer should come back from the staff.
That was not my question. My question was, is 30 what we discussed?
Okay.
Okay, that's the question.
Per session.
Yeah, per session.
That's
Right.
what
Based
I
on
recall.
what- okay,
But
so that-
was the tape unclear? Was that the?
I might have transcribed it wrong, I can go back and check.
Well,
That
how
was the
about this?
question.
Let's simply approve the minutes with the idea that we'll verify it, right, with that understanding. And then next time we meet, to circle back with, and let us know what that updated number is. Does that sound like a reasonable? Okay, so does anybody have other comments that they'd like to make with respect to the minutes before we move their approval? Hearing none, motion then to approve the minutes as noted.
So move.
Thank you very much, Pastor Tate, and a second.
Second.
Thank you very much, Laura. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed or abstaining? Thank you very much. So, on a motion made by Pastor Tate, seconded by Laura San Regret, the minutes from our last meeting were unanimously approved with one notice that we're going to circle back and verify that number, which brings us to the public comments. I have no information in front of me, so does that mean that?
Sorry. No, there's no public comment.
Oh, yes, that's what I was looking for, so, good, which brings us to debriefing last night. So I'll start and then invite Sally and any others who were there to feel free, pardon me, to jump in as well. The agenda was circulated in advance, and Carolyn Jones did a masterful job of keeping us on track. She was a little bit, undone by the fact that she was the one who asked us to silence our cell phones, and her cell phone kept going off because she kept using it to time our sessions, you know. So every 15 minutes or so, there was a little bit of comic action that happened. The meeting opened up with an overview of the purpose of the meeting that she and I had kind of agreed to in terms of the talking points. And then we had an overview of accomplishments and successes, challenges. So Odell Owens and Christine Fisher spoke about the two main lines of work, tuition assistance and quality improvement. There were two very good overviews. One from Dan Poing about the master agreement scope of work. I thought he did a great job of sort of taking us into the guts, yet at a high level. I had just, not having looked at that document in a while, reread it yesterday afternoon, and he just did an ace's job of laying that out. And then we talked a bit in discussion subsequently about need to revisit certain elements of it and how might we go about revising the document. Jennifer Wagner then gave an overview on planning for the next levy. Clearly, we're going to need to impanel some kind of a task group to think about that at a high level. That's something already going on in the Finance Committee, I understand, and so that's probably where it needs to sit for the time being. And then got into a variety of issues, our short, long-term transition plan. I told them that we were, since we would be meeting today, there were elements with respect to search committee, timeline, stakeholder feedback, and so on, which you had not yet heard, and therefore it would be inappropriate for me to share those things with them, but I would circle back and, after the board meeting today. And then we had a very, very good, perhaps it was really the heart of the meeting, about how to operate as a collaborative group, decision-making, communication together, and so on, that started off very polite, as you'd imagine. When we got to the 250 to 300 piece of it, then that kind of smoked the big issue kind of out in the open, and I thought there was a very good conversation around that. And then following that was the assignment of various work groups. I'll circle back to that at the end, and would just welcome anybody's comment, feedback, input as to how things went, what your impressions were, and so on before I do so. So, Sally, do you want to say anything to get started?
Only that there's nothing like face-to-face to get the real conversation going. I know I had sent the link to the Monday night board meeting to everybody, and there were a variety of issues they talked about, including and especially their own nominees, but it was relatively negative, in my opinion. And it's easy to do that when you don't know one another. And when we had a chance to get together and speak Wednesday night, I felt like it was a giant step toward what will be future, deeper, authentic conversations. So as we really needed it to see one another face to face and keep from making sort of assumptions, which is what I think people do when they don't have a chance to just be together. So good start.
Others who were there? Comments that you'd like to make? The curse was that we're kind of talking to the two of you. We're the only ones present here today who are unable to be there, and then staff and the rest of you as well, but please.
I thought it was incredibly productive, and I do think that those relationships, as we build them, you know, and you just said this as we were talking before the board meeting started, is the reality is drama seems to ensue when somebody doesn't really know the full picture, and by knowing one another, now we can pick up the phone and ask. And I think that's going to help us create a collaborative relationship that's going to draw out the best in everybody so we can be successful at getting our kids into all the childhood.
One of the things that, and I had to leave a little bit early, but one of the points that I was most concerned about is communication and how we're going to communicate. I think that one of the things that I didn't hear mentioned last night was the communication between the executive director and Vera and her predecessor. There was a lot of effort that went into almost diagramming and, you know, systemically looking at some of the buckets that Ryan Messer talked about in his RC. So I think that needs to be brought back to the table, you know, for whatever work group is looking at communication. Because one of the things that seems to happen far too often is we miss a CPS meeting or they miss one of our meetings, so some of the communication is not flowing the way, you know, it could. If, for instance, Finance Committee, approval of the budget, our budget, their timing, you know, going to the board, they have certain, you know, hard stops, like the date that Jen has to have everything to create the budget for purchase orders, and it's June 24th, you know. So those are the kind of things that it's in the weeds, but it's important for someone to help manage that, much as well as the higher level communications.
I'd like to add to that, it was great to finally dispel the myth of hidden agendas. You finally got a chance to
I
see
agree.
the
I really
spirit
agree,
of
yeah.
work. And I think we have to, as a board, take advantage of leveraging our relationships. Fortunately, we have personal relationships with a lot of people on the board, and likewise, they have personal relationships here. I think we've missed an opportunity to close the gap of them and us by leveraging those relationships and realize that we are on the same team, we all have the same goal in mind, and that's to make sure our children get the best. So it was great to finally see that spirit in the room again.
Vanessa, I thought you made a really good point about how many conversations there were early on. And so we kind of got used to all of that, and then it went away, you know? And now what we've got to do is figure out how in a more routine manner we have those conversations once again as we need to.
I think Carolyn highlighted the same, that the first year, there was all these, things in place, and then, I guess, getting comfortable, maybe, we kind of didn't do it, or thought something was adequate when it wasn't, and so, I mean, to the point of, that needs to happen. I mean, and I think the whole issue, I think there was conversation and definition around what functional autonomy versus like the day-to-day and getting things done versus that connection to the fiscal autonomy. And need to make sure that we're all thinking about the way we think about public dollars and public use, and making sure that we're having those conversations. So fiscal, I mean, the functional autonomy is the day-to-day, but at the end of the day, we don't want to compromise anything that would make the resources stop.
Something along that line that I was really struck by was one of their members said quite explicitly about our absolute independence. I think that was the phrase that she used. But there were lots of heads that nodded around the board, the CPS board, I mean. And so that's the kind of thing where a couple of years ago, we would have wondered, if they really thought that. And it was, so to the point, Pastor Tate, that you made about there was just no sense at all of hidden agendas or people going in different directions or whatnot, So it was very good in that way. Let me come to the issue of kind of the next steps and work groups and so on. One of the topics that came up that was kind of unexpected, wasn't reflected in the agenda, but it got a lot of traction early on, was outreach to the state of Ohio with the new governor in now around issues of incremental dollars that could help fund preschool efforts here in Cincinnati and more broadly. And so what will almost certainly happen is the request for some kind of a resolution from our board, from their board, and that will kind of work its way through the system. They have a couple of people who they hire to pull strings and do lobbying as they can, and will engage them about putting together some kind of a position paper and getting something going. Once it gets to that stage, then they'll engage us and potentially others in the community and other stakeholders across the state. There's a possibility that it sounds like that the governor actually may be down here and may be interested in seeing what we do in the early childhood space. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see if that becomes a leverageable opportunity. Go ahead.
Can I just comment on that for a moment? Because just before I came down here, I got an email from Leisha Lyman, who does public policy work around early childhood funding on behalf of our community and in partnership with other communities, and is extremely knowledgeable about sort of where things stand and where the flow. I mean, we're way late on the upcoming budget, and it would take, a resolution is nice, essentially, she said, but any real change in policy or procedure or funding, really, there's a long runway, and participating in that and getting our Board of Education and Cincinnati Board of Education and the community together to get on board, if you will, about and help shape some state strategies is a great idea. A joint resolution with us all saying, yeah, let's do this thing, is not really going to, it's a small piece in a very large effort, and I think that if we're serious about this and the Cincinnati Board of Education is serious, it's joining with others to get something done. So it's good, it's a step, it's not going to suddenly rain down funding on our community for this work.
Sally, we may have talked about this at a previous board meeting or executive committee, I think, Hector, because I think I might ask you about it, but the current budget, right, has an expansion of childcare dollars, either eligibility and dollars, I think, that would, if passed, positively impact our bottom line. Is that?
So Laura referenced this last night, and I was a little, she said, Sally, help me on this, and I was a little taken aback about how out of the loop I am on all of this. It used to be like I lived this, but I don't know. We can ask our community members here or to explain that, but I don't know.
Yeah, Groundworks has the, well, the federal child care block grant was expanded, and then, so it flows to Ohio, and then they were expanding. In fact, I keep getting these emails from, that it's been expanded. It's supposed to be in the budget, but now we write thank yous to make sure that it's in the budget, and, you know, this.
Is it like an expansion at the poverty?
Yes,
It's
expansion
gonna
of
raise,
poverty.
right, so it's like up from 150 to 200 or something, or
I think those, it was from
135?
180, I mean, it's
Can
not
I-
quite 200.
If I can, if
Yeah.
it is all right, I would like to ask Vanessa or one of the community people to just give us a sentence or two on where that is.
Sure. All right, so the federal dollars.
Why don't you go to the microphone?
Over here?
Yeah. Thanks, Vanessa.
No, got ready. Oh,
Patty
no.
bows out at that point. No microphone for her.
So the federal dollars are going to improve the market rate reimbursement for a number of providers, a number of areas. That is actually in reaction to the fact that the state of Ohio is in violation of basically the floor for those market rates. So that will lift the reimbursement rates a bit. Well, I don't think it will have a very dramatic impact on the dollars that you are using to reimburse folks, but probably have to do a calculation on that because there's a table. In terms of the eligibility piece, that will not happen right away for parents. First problem is there's no place for those parents to put those children in terms of quality seats. So I don't know about you, Patty, but I think for us, we're thinking it's at least a year before the parent eligibility floor, which is at 130, 135 now, would raise up to 150%. Does that help?
Thank you very much.
So if you were a parent that was at 150% today and you were enrolled already, would they be immediately eligible? You're saying no, they wouldn't be.
So there's what we call a donut hole in the middle of that for parents. So if you enter too high, so today, if you're at 150% and you didn't enter lower, you get no help. And Preschool Promise, if you're fortunate enough to live in this district, can help you with that. So what it would do for Preschool Promise once this is in place, but again, at least a year away, is all those folks from 135 to 150 would now be eligible for assistance from the state. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we've got lots of stuff to get through, so last comment.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm glad that you raised that level of attention to this. When I was on the school board, I was on the a trustee of the Ohio School Board Association, and sometimes we forget that there are 8 urban districts, but there are 611 other districts in the state of Ohio that are lobbying for the same thing, because we don't think about rural, we don't think about all the other kinds of populations in the city who have strong advocacy. So, you know, it's always a long shot to think that somebody's gonna invest here over everybody else in the state.
Thank you. There was a significant amount of conversation over the issue of how are decisions made to support the partnership. And where we came to eventually was Ryan Messer suggesting that what we really need is an effort he called decision-making for dummies. So in other words, what decisions is this group perfectly capable of making on its own, perfectly competent to make, and so on? Where do we need to ask for input? Where do we simply need to inform and the like? And so what he suggested that we do is put together a working group. I've asked Cheryl Rose if she would be our counterpart to Ryan. She's agreed to do that. And so the idea is that they'll put together some kind of a framework which this group can buy in on, and then shop it to both of our groups to get our sign off on it. So that should kind of help clarify various roles and responsibilities, build the guardrails we can all stay in to make sure that the relationship is effective. A big conversation was around communications, and Carolyn Jones and I will be quarterbacking that effort. We're scheduling coffee towards the end of the month. Something that would be helpful, Sally, if you would pull together a kind of a map of what the current communications are between CPS and CPP, or have been in the past, just such that we'd be able to see that. And thanks, Vera, appreciate your help on that. So the idea is to kind of see what's there, what needs to be reinvigorated, where the gaps are, and what we might propose to close those gaps. One of the, I think, general takeaways from the meeting last night was that what happened last night should happen about twice a year. And so I'm sure that something like that will be part of the proposal that Carolyn and I and others will help develop. Debbie, did you have a comment that you wanted to make on that? Yeah. Curiously, one of the things that didn't come up, I was kind of leaning in to see if it might, but it didn't, was the master agreement. And so we didn't agree on a kind of process or a group.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should have.
To move that along. What I would suggest is those issues have always been identified in the finance working group. And if you guys would continue to be on top of that. The general idea that was expressed was that we want to have flexibility to make sure we can do the things that we absolutely need to do, and yet at the same time, from time to time, back up and capture the alterations we've made practically in how it is that the master agreement is being implemented, if you will. And then share that with the boards for their awareness and affirmation. So, but we ought to have some kind of way to get at that. I didn't want to push that at the end of the meeting. But
Yeah, I just want to make sure we hear everything we need to hear about what needs to change in that. So, well, yeah, I think it's absolutely fine for a finance committee. We can do that, right, Vanessa, and just kind of make sure that we're getting feedback along the way.
Can we have a conversation about it? Because the staff, including Shiloh, put a lot of work into saying what things have already changed that we might simply have a memo that says this is what we're doing, and what things do we wish to work around or change. And we have quite a good list that we ought to bring forward and see what things we just say, okay, fine, everybody agrees, and what things require some discussion and negotiation.
And I think that would be so helpful. And I guess the only question in my mind is this, do we need a separate working group from finance committee to?
we didn't impanel one, and so what strikes me is that we shouldn't create one. But what the finance group could do when it meets jointly kind of across both groups is identify this as something that we didn't tackle, and it clearly needs to get done in some way. What would their thoughts be, such that we could then, each could go back to their respective stakeholder groups and get some information. Vanessa?
Yeah, there's nothing, I mean, to the list you just mentioned, Sally, there's nothing that doesn't have financial impact, I guess is the issue. And so it would be great if you could do a memo to the full board, letting the full board know what those things are. And then can you repeat what Cheryl and Ryan are gonna be doing again?
That's the
RACI.
the RACI. Yeah.
So it's assessing.
Accountable, responsible, collaborative, or
Inform.
and
Inform.
consultant and inform.
Right.
Responsible, accountable,
I
consultant.
like decision-making for dummies.
And this is just another thing that I think came out, now that I'm thinking about it, just, they talked about the whole, the things that are that happen in committee, and that committees are informed. And it would be great if we would start to share, because there's a lot of action, and not just our agenda, not just our minutes from our board meetings, but share our minutes from all the meetings that are happening. Because sometimes that gets siloed as well within this organization, like the governance committee met and where the government. So it would be great, because I know they get that, and it's not always easy to call it out or be told you have to go look on the website as a board member to get that information. So it would be good if we would have all these agendas, because that way, now that all this stuff is moving, that we all stay informed. Because I think clearly, the things that board members find out in committee we're informed, it goes back to them as well. So I think as a board committee, we need to make sure we are keeping up with everything, so that we're knowledgeable.
And would there be, I love that, and would there be anything prohibiting us from doing kind of an executive summary for each?
Not minutes, not executive summary, full minutes from every board, every committee meeting.
What I'm asking, and this is just out of the nature of people's attention spans, I think generally, who's gonna really dig into the detail to find out the pertinent points? Is there anything that would prohibit us from saying, here are 4 key things, and here are the minutes attached, right? So it's just kind of, hey, look at this. I mean, I don't know.
How about, we don't have to solve this issue here.
And the other
I
thing
thank you
I'm
for
saying is,
flagging it.
Now you've assigned yet another group, and how do we make sure that, because they go back to their board members, they have to, and let them know. Ryan will share with the full board what they are, so I just want to make sure that,
They do committee reports.
yeah,
Board
and,
meetings.
yeah, and every committee, every board member gets a report of every committee, and now here's this separate committee, and how will we know what is going on with these single relationships?
I'll put that on the agenda for coffee with Carolyn. Good, that really concludes it. So absent any other comments people want to make, we'll transition to Sally's report.
Okay, previously, you might have seen a slide presentation of some of the things, but not tonight, maybe in the future. We have 1,000 things going. The staff are just like going a million miles an hour, and I wanted to mention 7 I know that's a lot, you're supposed to do 3, I think, but I'm gonna mention 7 things we're working on just to give you a sense of some of the activities. So enrollment, a topic very near and dear to everybody's heart. We're making calls and visits to every provider to re-enroll all the 3-year-olds and every child who's eligible to re-enroll. We are hiring 2 P-team members, one before this weekend, which is the Juneteenth festival, and we'll have a team there. In partnership with Pastor Tate, we've been identifying some very specific community engagement activities, and in fact, I just counted them up tonight, the thing that we were talking about, and there are probably 35 specific things we have on the calendar in terms of places, people, activities in the community coming up over the next 6 months or so. So that's related to enrollment. Evaluation and data, and this is something I didn't put on the agenda but had a brief conversation or email exchange with Father Graham. There are a couple of things that I don't think can wait until August, and maybe we can circle back around to this, but I wanted to float the possibility of a board meeting in July if we can do it. One of them is you have not seen an evaluation report or heard an evaluation report from year 1. We think that is really essential for everybody to get a presentation from the Crane Center, and we have something that we want to get out to you as soon as possible. Our team is working on putting out an RFP for evaluation for year 3. I don't know if we're talking about year 3 and 4, but we're working to try to re-examine what are the essential data pieces we to know whether we're reaching our goals or not. I've been sort of obsessed with trying to get to a number that says, this is how many preschoolers we have under 200% of poverty. This is how many are currently in high-quality preschool in our community. That's not Preschool Promise or Cincinnati Public Schools or any particular thing, but we've been hearing numbers since the RAND report of how many kids are out there, and I am working with Eric Rademacher and Metrics and some others to try to say, how are we doing as a whole community? The number of kids in tuition assistance is not our impact. It's how many kids are really in high-quality preschool in our community. So that's my little side obsession, getting help on that. Our master agreement requires that we have a report to the Board of Education by July 15th. And we are putting together not only a printed report, which will come out later, but responding to that to say, who are we serving, where are they receiving services? So that's in the works. Previously, Shiloh was on the to present to the Board of Ed on June 24th. Maybe we'll do it then, or maybe at the July meeting, but we'll definitely make a presentation. All right, that's evaluation and data. Attendance, it's come to our attention. We know that children do best, and the KRA data shows if children attend 90% or more. Our kids are not attending at that level. They're present not at the 90% level. So we're going to be putting together a small group in consultation with the providers in the community and figure out why not, and what can we institute to push up attendance. Community relations, I think you know that I'm meeting with just about everybody in sight as much and as often as possible. We had a very authentic, direct, long meeting with Cincinnati Promise Forward on Tuesday night, where we got sort of deep into some thoughts and issues, and I felt it was really a fantastic meeting. So Vanessa was there for a good part of it, and also thought got to some good stuff. Okay, QI, not as much to report because that's rolling along, but at our last board meeting, as Debbie pointed out in the minutes, we talked about the 4C approach with cohorts and how that contract was going to work. You may or may not all know this, but we really came to the conclusion that it's perfectly allowable and billable and so forth within the current contract, that we did not need a different way of doing it in order to get that off the ground right away. And 4C is proceeding full speed ahead to enroll kids in those cohorts and keep that going. Budget, you're going to hear a lot more about the budget, or a little more about the budget, but this is, as I said to another group, I like planting seeds so things don't come as a shock to you. But in looking at the master agreement, I realized that it permits a 3% increase in the rate of reimbursement, and each year, or it actually is worded that if it's more than 3%, we have to ask and work it out. Jen Wagner and I have been in several conversations. We've been looking at numbers and what the implications are, and when you hear more about, like, the budget we're going to be looking at is not in its final form necessarily, I'm going to be advocating to see if we can raise the reimbursement rates. That's just like to let you know we're thinking about it and we want to work on it. The wage work, had a great discussion with Gary about how to think about this and how to get the next step and get it out the door and, so to speak. And I'll just say you're gonna be hearing more about that. We're gonna be working on that. But it's top of the priority going forward. So those are a few of the things that we're working on. Any questions or?
I have a comment. I want to thank Sally for that excellent report on her birthday, which is today. And let me tell you how I know that, because it's also my husband's birthday.
Right.
And I'm going to be leaving on time.
Thank you very much, congratulations. Christine?
Happy birthday. I was curious as to the 35 sort of community events and perhaps sharing those with the board members, you know, as we're out in the community, or, you know, I'm always looking to bring my kids to stuff because they get bored, so. You know, if we know what's out there and available, we can come. I don't know if there's Preschool Promise t-shirts, but we have something that we can hand out when we're at some of this community stuff. I think leveraging the fact that we have a 15-person board and we're all, you know, pretty active members outside of this, I think is a resource that hasn't quite been tapped yet.
Great, that's a fabulous idea. I want to say they aren't necessarily 35 community events. Some of them are people that Lakeisha will be meeting with, increased visibility with churches and at community councils. So it's not all parades and fairs, but some of it is. And so we'll definitely make sure you know
Or we
about it.
potentially grow that list based on the networks.
Yeah. Great.
On the attendance data, how do we compare to CPS, and do you have a sense of why, if there's a difference, why?
I don't know how we compare. Not for preschoolers, not a question we've ever asked.
I have a question,
But-
Vera. And maybe this is, the state changed the formula on attendance, what constitutes an absence. So this is just the CPS track. So many tardies equal an absence now. And
It's
attendance. Hours. So attendance has really dropped across the board in many of CPS's schools. Does that apply for your preschools?
No, in our
Okay.
preschools, we've been maintaining the higher attendance.
Okay.
But we also have a system in place that if someone has not arrived within the hour, the system, how we call and we contact and we find out where that child is, so we can report it to the correctly.
Do
You're
have
just gonna suggest such a
requirements
thing?
Well, my comment,
85% or higher.
and
But we shoot as a district for 93% or higher.
But at preschool, it's 85, you're saying?
That's Head Start, but we shoot
Okay.
for the 93%.
In addition to the calls, are there any other things you do to encourage attendance for those who may not be attending that
Well,
frequently?
within our enrollment registration hubs, we have assistant school community coordinators, and they are assigned to classrooms weekly, that they are in there too. So if a family, say, maybe lost their home and they're having to relocate, that individual is there to connect them with Project Connect or another resource. So we have individuals that can help a
Kind of
family
helping them
through
get through
whatever challenges might be coming their way.
Yes.
my point was just gonna be, it's not apples and oranges.
Right.
Mhm.
So I would just caution us to try to make a direct correlation from one to the other. The district does simply priority, so you're dropping off, older children and you're dropping off your preschooler, so there's a lot of things moving differently, so we just go there.
Yeah, and I think, and that's part of the reason I was asking the question, is recognizing the district may also have more resources committed, and that, there may be learnings in terms of like, what would it take to help fix, help
Yeah.
address this.
And that's exactly, I did hear, when I attended the CPS board meeting on Monday, one of the board members referred to attendance incentives. So I went right to their website and said, like, what are they doing for incentives? And they have a whole activity around incentives. So I don't want to solve that here. I just want you to know that we'll come back to you with what we find, both in terms of what our issues are and some suggestions for addressing.
One of the things to remember is that most of the community providers may have a different attendance practice or a different rate. So some of them have stayed around 75 or 80. So if the children are there 80% of the time, that works for the state as well as that particular center. So when we're looking for the data, let's make sure we remember that as well.
Thank you, good discussion. Twyla, you're on.
Okay, great. So I have, our committee members for our search committee will be myself as the chair, and then Kristen Fisher, Terry England, and Dr. Yusuf Ahmad. One of the things that I wanted to kind of share is my excitement and slightly fear of the process. One of the things I think is exciting is that we have an opportunity to find a leader that understands the importance of childhood, early childhood education, and an individual that can work with both the staff and the board, and also the community, and also a person that values the child's experience in preschool and understanding that it sets the foundation for their life, and also that it also is important for their social, emotional, and physical and academic strength as they go through their journey. So that is kind of my own personal passion that I hope to bring to this. We definitely have a tight window of 90 days, and I have met with Centennial, who will be working with, again, with Becky Schuler, several times to kind of create a timeline, which is also in your packets, and you can refer to that. Centennial's role will be a little less than before, but still very active in helping us to do the intake of the resumes, conduct interviews, as well as to do the in-person interviews, assemble the notes that we'll need as a subcommittee to kind of work together to decipher through the candidates. They also will schedule the meetings for us. They will be reaching out to the subcommittee members today and kind of this week, before this week is over, which is tomorrow, and actually trying to get a calendar date for us to meet in person. They'll do the background checks, they'll help with communication processes, and kind of make sure we do best practice. They also will send out information within their networks to help us to get a pool of candidates, but they will be relying on us as a board and the stakeholders that we reach out to get the majority of candidates and resumes. And so they're looking for us to kind of take the lead in that part. The timeline in your packet, if you want to refer to it, is very ambitious and very much something I think that can be done. Looking at today and what has been done today, I'm just going to kind of skim through it, and you can read it, and you can ask me questions about it. One of the goals is to try to ambitiously get out information in the community next week. I put the 20th there, but as you saw on the actual form, it says draft, so that may change. But the goal is to actually get out in the press and to stakeholders and an email the job description, and to look at the candidates that we had prior to hiring Shiloh in 2017, if there's any candidates that still that Centennial has in their database that we can utilize to announce this position to. Also, the hopes is that moving from there, once we get this out into the public and it's noticed, that we actually start to have our meetings to look over applications and to do a similar process of what happened last time, just at an accelerated rate. The ultimate goal, if you look at the timeline, is that we would start having a benchmark period where we would have initial rounds in July, where we would actually start to interview or narrow down our candidates, and then start our round of interviews. And then by August 5th, which is a super ambitious but hopeful goal, we would have our, not August 5th, August 12th, we would actually have interviews prepared for the board, or actually do interviews with the board with the narrowed down candidates. So we also have some marketing suggestions, and it's pretty similar to last time, the agreement that we had with Centennial as far as what they did. And that is it for that. And then also, and I don't know if Dr. Father Graham is going to talk about this, but there's comments from the stakeholders. I know that we send out information to our stakeholders. I recently met with a few of the staff members to talk to them about some of the things that they were looking for in characteristics of a director. And so kind of compiling that information and working within our search committee in order to kind of have a real fluid conversation and a real direct look at what we want in our next leader.
I have some additional material to add to that, but Twilyn, did that finish up
Yes.
your remarks? Thank you very much. So if I have names that have been suggested to me of people who others think would make good executive directors, what should I do with those names at this point?
Go to send them to Cincinnati.
Send them to Centennial, good. I'll take care of that tomorrow, thank you.
Twila, one thing, just some food for thought. I think one of the biggest challenges we had in the last process was getting meetings scheduled. And especially for the full board for finalist candidates, might be worth considering going ahead and securing a date, even though, you know, it may need to change, but at least it's out there, and I think that helps
It's a good
ease
idea.
the biggest barrier, which is getting people together.
Leslie, perhaps you could send an email out to all the board members with the contact information for Centennial to facilitate our being able to make nominations directly to them. Thank you so much.
So I have one question. In the draft for today, approval for agreement, is that something that's going to come before the board, or how is that? Because it's not listed on the agenda. Is it in another format? What would we be approving?
Well, I brought, so I'm assuming, and I may be wrong, that the executive committee, when I talked about the agreement, I don't know if we still need to get the agreement to the executive committee. I know when I, we need to get that approved. I know that we had some additional questions about some things that were in the agreement, which I did get answered.
Okay.
So. I just
And
think
we
it's
were comfortable with the number, I know,
Mhm.
but it wasn't formally approved.
Yes. And
So is that something that we need to bring up today for her to be able to move forward?
That's kind of what I'm wondering.
Well, I don't know that we do. I think this is within the guidelines that which you could approve as executive director, if that's appropriate.
I can say two things. One is that we would have money in the budget. It's not gonna break our budget line item, and that it is within my authority. The question is, do you feel like it's appropriate?
I don't feel it's appropriate, and I think that we need to be transparent with a recommendation that we, approve Centennial for the dollar amount and the scope of work, that Torlin and the committee are working on, that we in principle approve that scope of work, because when I was looking at this, it seems that, this kind of embodies most of it. I did have a couple of questions, but I think this board needs to approve that.
So with that description and overview that Debbie just gave, is it appropriate, because the dollar amount was $15,000?
Right.
So is it appropriate to follow Debbie's lead and offer the motion so that, to Sally's point, making sure that we stay within the guidelines of transparency, can we go ahead and move that forward? It's $15,000, that's already in the budget, and it's not gonna break us, as Sally said, and rather than hold the process up for a full presentation, about $15,000.
I would like to make the motion.
How about, let's wait till Vanessa's back in the room, shall we?
Okay.
So that I would just prefer not to have a vote with the board member out of the room.
Okay.
So, but,
Can we ask questions?
Entertain a
though?
motion, because the discussion should come.
sure, there we go, we can do it that way, so.
What did you say?
We can entertain a
The discussion should
motion.
come after the motion,
Okay.
because
All
then
right.
we're discussing the motion.
Okay, so we can't discuss this.
Make our
Well,
motion
let's
over
make a
here,
motion, we
woman.
just won't vote
Thank
for
you.
a few minutes. So who would like to move? I think you just did.
Now, she was moving, I was second.
Oh, okay.
Move, Debbie.
I make a motion that we hire Centennial to be the executive search, and that the amount that we are approving is $15,000.
Second the motion.
Thank you. Discussion.
I might add that, for context, the original amount for the last search was $35,000. So I think, Toyland did a very nice job negotiating the arrangement, and by hiring a firm that has experience, they know us, they've been down the path, and probably have the best chance of getting this moving quickly. I think that makes sense. I think Toyland did a very nice job on that.
Other comments or questions that people would like to make?
Can we discuss this?
Sure.
Is it okay?
It is, at the same time, yes, I know.
Okay.
I don't want us to get into a line-by-line read-through of this. I think we need to approve it in general general, assuming that it will be modified as we go. 'Cause
It's a draft.
otherwise
It's a
we'll-
draft.
Yeah, otherwise we're gonna be here for 35 minutes going through the draft. So what happened while you stepped out was, we thought it was best to approve Centennial today so that they could move forward with this. The number, the dollar number is 15,000, and this effectively sort of gives what the scope of work is. And so, that it still is in a draft form, it will be finessed, but if we're comfortable with this overall document, comfortable with 15,000. Debbie Alsep made the motion, Pastor Tate seconded it, and we're in the discussion phase now.
I would ask one question, and that is timeline. We continue to say 90 days, but I think we talked that it would probably go beyond 90 days, because the wrap-up for the search would take place after our August meeting. And so we won't have time to vote, I guess, until the September meeting, unless the annual meeting is a different day. So we probably just need to keep that in mind, that Sally's role may be extended beyond 90 days, and that would carry us into our annual meeting in September.
Or if
Happy
we,
birthday.
yeah.
During the interviews, like we voted last time at the special meeting we made.
I was thinking that if we have a good bulk of the board members present on the 12th, we can handle it then. So I think you did a good thing, which was, what's 90 days from now, and then back up the schedule. So,
And we thought even, just a discussion with Centennial, that it might kind of overlap a little bit,
Yes.
but not extremely, you know, that we could still kind of accomplish this in August, you know, maybe.
It won't be another birthday, I can tell you.
so
Thank you.
there's a motion on the floor that's been made and seconded to approve Centennial with this understood scope of work at the rate of $15,000. So are we ready for the vote? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstaining? Thank you very much. So on a well-considered motion made by Debbie Alsep, seconded by Pastor Tate, to allow this process to move forward, the board approved hiring Centennial as our search consultant for this process. Did you have anything else, Toylan?
That's it for me. Thank
Great.
you.
Let me take you to the sheet she referenced already, the summary of stakeholder feedback. As you know, a number of you were engaged in this process. In point of fact, we reached out to probably about 15 to 18 organizations for the most part, but some individuals as well, and asked them for their thoughts, reactions as to characteristics desirable in the next executive director, whether interim or permanent. Most answered the question in terms of a permanent executive director. And so what I did, I'll do it this way, there's more on that side. So what I took the liberty of doing is just kind of reading it through and making notes and so on, and you can see this here. What's coming around now is a stakeholder feedback that I got this morning from Ozzie Davis on behalf of Promise Forward. What it seems to be is kind of lots of suggestions made by lots of people in a set of effectively bullet points in that first body, and then there are in several different paragraphs other comments that are kind of clustered by topic, if you will. As I was reading it through earlier today, I could put a lot of these comments into the buckets that are on this other page, which is a good thing. But I give it to you so that you have it, but especially I give it to Toylan and those of you who will be serving on the search committee, because this should inform your thinking about the characteristics desirable in the next executive director. We'll say more about this in executive session, and I kind of prefer to wait until that time to drill into this a bit more. I'll tee up kind of a conversation topic at that point. So anyway, this is just background for right now. So with that in mind, if we could then get to the budget.
And I want to be mindful of time for the remainder of the agenda.
Yeah,
expedient.
do what you can.
Okay, so, it's very important today that we do some sort of approval for budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Through this process, we realized that our process probably wasn't what it needed to be in terms of soliciting feedback, having ample time for review, and also ample time for collaboration with CPS's Finance Committee and Board, giving them an opportunity to opine as well. So just to kind of teaser, I'll do what Sally's doing just to not surprise. Our ultimate recommendation today is that we do vote to approve a $9 million total budget, that we also approve 3 months of a budget as sits before you, which we'll go through some of the high points of that. And in addition to that, we would approve any annual contracts. That would need to be approved as well. And then we would, over the course of that next 3 months, hold community listening sessions, collaboration, make sure that we are creating a more engaged process so that we get all of the feedback needed to make sure that we have the best budget possible. So that's coming kind of at the end. So with that, in front of you, you do have the proposed budget as it stands today, draft. And I'll highlight what you're seeing on each page, and then we'll just really focus on some elements on the first page. But you'll see that this is CPP only budget. The first page is a highlight summary, which we'll get to in a little more detail in a moment. The second page drills down into more detail in each category. And then Hector created a presentation with some of the key points that drove how the budget is currently allocated. So clearly, the budget's built to reduce underspend. That's something that was a bit of a struggle for us in this past year. So we wanted to build a tighter budget. We included funds for expansion of tuition assistance from $250 to $300 as well. New supports to support quality improvement, outdoor equipment, technology, FCC insurance subsidy, so funding for those. And then finally, expansion of cost of quality wage supports to 0 to 2-star providers. And then a couple of support graphs around tuition assistance, quality improvement, and cost of quality. So that's what is in the packet. And so, you know, we'll have ample time in the future to get into more detail about this. But so let's go back to this summary page. And if you draw, I'm going to draw you over to the right-hand side of these columns and rows here. And you'll see there's a fiscal year 20 budget. So that's the dollar amount allocated. Then we have the forecast for 19, the 19 budget, and then the color-coded categories to the right show the fiscal year 20 proposed budget versus what we budgeted last year. So you see in there some red, and that's where we really had some underspend. And then to the right of that, fiscal year 20 budget minus 19 forecast. And it is my recommendation that we focus our efforts there, because the reality is we spent what we spent this past fiscal year. We know what that is now. We have a pretty good forecast of that. And so that to me is really the most important piece. So just going over a few key elements, you'll notice about $1 million in increase in tuition assistance that is budgeted. $726,000 in QI spending. Cost of quality, wages, workforce, $532,558 increase. And then a new line item that we put in here as contingency for program expansion, with the intention being that we create, because one thing we've noticed is we're still kind of learning as we go. And so having some contingency fund that allows us to make decisions throughout the year based on enrollment, based on needs, based on all of this, I think it's going to provide us with ample flexibility to be successful in this coming year. I also want to point out that you may notice at the summer programs, it's an increase of $2.7 million. The good news is that's versus there is an increase in some of administrative of $500,000, but it's good that we're pushing more funds and increase into the things that are really relevant to getting kids in seats. So I think we could always get into the weeds in this, but as we've had a couple of finance meetings over the past couple of weeks and have solicited some feedback, it became more and more apparent to us that we need to do a little bit more of this to really get this right. So with that, and, you know, in Jen Wagner's recommendation, they're willing to provide, you know, for us to approve this today, it would be $9 million that we would approve for the budget, and that's what she, you know, feels is reasonable. That we would use the current proposed for the next 3 months, and that we would go through this process to better understand it.
Which then could lead to modifications in the various budget line items, which would be brought back to this group for affirmation at that time.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
How about, before we go on, I'd like to turn to the other members of the Finance Committee if they would like to add additional comments.
A big piece of the engagement and feedback that did not happen, that actually has to happen, is that for this needs to go through the CPS Finance Committee. And so we will be bringing it to them on June 20th. But really, the process needs to be that it goes through the CPS Finance Committee before it comes here. That is one area that has been better defined, the process and input.
But
and
Jen Wagner is comfortable with the approach that
Jen
you
Wagner's,
outlined?
Yeah, she's been instrumental in, yeah.
Oh, the approach of this.
Yes,
the
right,
approach
yeah, I
of
wanted
doing
to-
it in this
yeah,
way, yes.
right.
But I do want to make it clear that moving forward, absolutely next year.
The expectation.
The expectation is that it goes to the CPS Finance Committee first.
I can just mention one thing, and that is that Hector attends each one and has presented this to them. So I think there's a little bit of confusion of maybe what it means. I want to learn more about it, but they have seen this.
The
and-
20 budget or the 19 budget?
I think we
The-
can
it's-
just stay on topic.
Yeah.
Exactly, it's useless to go back and,
Jennifer did not
right.
feel as though she had seen it, so I'm not sure. I don't
We
think,
didn't-
I don't think we want
Jen
to,
Wagner.
I don't think we should get in the weeds on.
Right,
Okay.
Exactly, no,
Okay.
that's exactly right.
Okay.
But I think that she made it clear, yeah, there was a process that first year where we were on a calendar and knew what their schedules were, and again, that's part of communication. It just has to be, so I just wanted to just make sure, clarify. We said that we would approve not like a third, but the first 3 months. So I think it's July, August, and September, is
Okay.
what we agreed to. And then that,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
and then that, I just wanna make sure phrasing is right, that, and plus any contractual obligations that need to be met, not new contractual obligations,
Yeah.
right?
Do you want me to read the motion? Would that be helpful?
Huh?
We crafted, would it be
Yeah,
helpful
I
to make
just
sure we
wanna
get it
make
right?
one point before we're
Sure.
clear, before, the one thing that, Jennifer, and it did come up last night, and we didn't say anything, but, it's the new things that she had not heard about. And she did say that there was a habit that Hector has been coming to the meetings, but Hector was maybe out of town or couldn't make the main meeting when this could have been, so she was not at all thinking it was, intentional or anything. It was just more, it just, Hector was out of town, didn't get planned, and that's fine. But I do want to make sure, because they did bring up, Melanie Bates did bring up, in terms of communication, that this new thing that they didn't know in advance of this approval is something that will come up, you know, the 250 to 300 is something that will come up. And we need to get worked through, and then these new areas and how they align with the issue of proper public purpose. So just going to the finance committee with the understanding, and that's why we said, well, we don't want the operations to stop, we want everything to keep moving, but we also want to have public hearings so that people are feeling uneasy about having never seen the budget, especially in the environment where the district has public hearings, the city has public hearings, and with public money, there's just should be public hearings. So.
Thank you.
So let me just ask, just for clarification, so, obviously, like you said, in the first year, there was a better schedule and a rhythm and good communication from the staff. I mean, that clearly is really important, that we understand their timelines and that we're working with Jen and providing information, so all that makes sense. And if we need to improve that, we should improve it. When you mentioned going to the finance committee, are you saying it's going to the finance committee for approval approval, or you're just saying for consideration or review? Like, what level are we saying it needs to go to the finance
Yeah.
committee?
Well, no, let's be clear. No, I do think it's important to say, like, this fiscal responsibility, still have fiscal
Right.
responsibility. By June 24th, the district has to appropriate the funds under, state guidelines. And so she is going to make the $9 million appropriation as long as her board doesn't not approve. So if the board does not approve an appropriation, then she's not gonna administer that appropriation. So if there's other things we need to work through to get the other appropriations approved, but if the board has to approve the appropriation in order for her to cut a check,
So,
she'll do that anyway.
so maybe ask it a different way too. So just in general, year over year going forward, are we saying that we still approve the budget, our budget, and then it goes to them for approval?
For the
Or are you
appropriation.
saying it has to go to them for approval before we approve it?
No. We
That's all.
approve the budget.
Uh-huh. And then
If
it
this
goes to
budget,
them?
because, Christine and I hadn't seen the budget either before the board meeting, and we just didn't have time as members of the finance committee I think there were some changes, and so
Before
just,
which board meeting?
I think the last board meeting is when we got
And it's
the
the
budget.
third board meeting we talked about? I mean,
Well, we
It's
had
been the
that
exec-
finance
It never
committee.
went
It's
to
been
the
the executive
finance
committee as
committee
well.
as
That's where you're
the
gonna be
finance
referencing
committee,
executive.
it never went to the finance committee for approval. It just followed the process.
Yeah.
It was seen at the board, and then we didn't, it was the discussion of walking through it, and then there were some things that couldn't be explained at the last finance committee meeting. One of it, so we hadn't even, I think our protocol is to recommend it to the board, and the finance committee didn't have, which is why we had 2 meetings. So it's just getting a protocol in place so
Yeah.
that we make sure that it's fluid, so that all approvals are in line, so Jennifer does not have any problems
And
dropping
Gary,
the
I
check.
think to your point of the sequencing though, of why it goes to CPS Finance Committee before it would come here, is that they might raise flags of things that they would hold an appropriation up for. And so while I believe we can approve programming elements and decisions within our budget that fit within the master agreement, they still have the final approval of the allocation to, or the appropriation of the funds to us.
Yeah.
And so if there are programming elements within our budget that would make them not vote for it, if they felt like we were not doing proper public purpose with some of our programming elements that we included. So I think that from the smoothest way that we can continue to operate is that if it goes from our finance committee to their finance committee to this board for approval, to their board for approval.
And I think that first step is probably gonna fall under consult. We're gonna consult with them, so they have a chance to look at it and see if
Right.
there's anything that they say, I don't know about that, it's not,
Yeah, I mean, and the beauty of the way the financial working group was constructed was to have Jennifer at the table.
and she's been great, She and Hector work very well
I
together.
mean, she's
It's
great,
good.
and
May I
so,
say
yeah, I
something?
think that's the beauty of it, so.
Some of the conversations about communication, like Vanessa, you bring up the 250 to 300%. I mean, I just make the point that,
Gary, let's not go there, okay?
I didn't bring it up.
Yeah, let's, what we need to do is figure out what the process is we need to go forward. So I know that this is an important issue for you, but let's not go there, okay?
Okay, but I'm
Thank
just setting the record straight that we've been discussing this for over 8 years, so it's not as if.
Right, and so what I see happening in this is constructing a runway of sufficient length with check-ins along the way, such that that all can be documented in the future in a way that we don't have the ability to do effectively now. So there was a good conversation about this issue last night. What emerged for me was this is a good example of what we don't want to see happen in the future. And so what we want to do is create a process going forward so as to avoid as much as possible those getting crosswise with one another.
Melody-based comment was about communication.
Right, it was.
And I feel a need to say this because when I came into this job, I thought about 2 things with the staff. One is to hold them to high expectations, and the other is to defend them and tout what they're doing when they're doing a good job. And there is some information that's been put forward here that is not accurate about the communication with the Board of Ed and the Finance Committee and this board. And I just want to put out there a defense and support for our staff so that they do not leave here having things said that are not accurate about their performance without a defense. So I'm putting a defense out there.
I'm confused because I didn't hear anybody say anything about the staff's performance at all.
Well, has the budget gone before the Finance Committee of the board? Have they seen it? Has Jen been a part of the decisions around the playground? Yes,
Sally,
yes,
Sally.
yes.
My response back from the chair of the finance committee was that it was approved in the executive committee.
Approved.
Are recommended that you all have worked on it. I was not a part of,
We reviewed it, we didn't.
okay, but, okay.
We said we were
I- I
bringing it to the board on multiple occasions. I do think.
Okay,
I do think this is the third
it's
time.
just
we've had
about
it.
the process.
Yeah.
It is not a reflection.
Please, we're starting to kind of go like this, and it's a he said, she said, and we're not gonna be able to go back in time and construct exactly what the process was and so on, nor would it be a good use of our time. So this is the kind of thing that the communication, the RACI work should mightily inform in terms of what the process is, with all the appropriate sign-offs. This is the kind of thing that is always going to be just about the most sensitive issue that arises between the two of us, the two of our organizations. And so I want to focus on what we need to approve this now, to move it forward so we can do our work and then begin the process of better alignment with CPS.
Okay, so I would like to say, and there was nothing in my intention or in the conversation was anything about the staff. As Sally brought up before in her minute.
How about if you just
stated-
stop there and we'll note that? Vanessa, I don't want to keep this going, I just don't,
Okay.
okay? So,
I just
heard
think
you,
it's inappropriate.
heard you, thank you. So you have a motion
I
you'd
have a
like to read?
motion I would like to read. So the motion is made to approve the total amount of $9 million for full fiscal year 2020 budget, CPP only, with the allocation of that budget to be approved as presented for the first 3 months, July, August, September, and approve fulfillment of existing contractual obligations, with the expectation that we will hold one or more public budget hearings and, based in part of the hearings and other data, present the board with a budget for approval in September for the duration of the fiscal year.
And this was discussed in the Finance Committee, this motion that we just heard. Good, thank you. So, could we, huh?
To get the data rolling, I'm gonna second it. Let's go. I just love
Thank
it.
you. Is there any conversation on it further? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote, please. All those in favor of approving the motion? Aye. Those opposed? Abstaining? We're down to almost the bare minimum, but we squeaked by. So on a motion made by Cheryl Rose and seconded by Laura Sandregret, the budget was approved with all the asterisks pertaining thereunto. So thank you very much. We'll look forward to how this works itself out. And thank you, Hector, for a great deal of work to pull this together.
Yes.
So, and welcome back from vacation, even though it's so that leads us to observers' comments or observer comments, I
I was about to
think,
say, I'm
today.
alone
So
tonight.
it's kind of all you, Vera.
I just have two real quick. First of all, I wish to thank this board, CPP board, for joining CPS's board last night. It was very productive. I felt it was very positive, and I think we're all moving in the right direction. And I was very excited to hear both boards come together to come up with the next steps and assignments and work groups. And Sally, I look forward, I'll be in touch with Leslie to set a time where we can look at flow and start working on
Great.
some things from past to future and moving forward.
It's that communication thing.
It's a
Yeah.
communication thing. And I think that's a vital part. The dialogue was very respectful. It's okay to agree and disagree, and I think we're moving forward in the right direction. I also wanted to work with Sally or whomever. I know I report to Superintendent Mitchell, and you talk with Father Graham. But I think we will work really hard. I will work hard to get those timelines of the financials, so as Vanessa and Christine were saying, you know, get that flow back into the flow of the times, like you're saying, Gary. If we have them, I'll work with our departments to get those timelines that we can move forward with that we're not always kind of spinning our wheels. Dialogue tonight was great. Appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to go into executive session now to speak about some issues pertaining to hiring a permanent executive director. We'll need a motion to enter executive session for the purpose noted there. Thank you very much, Cheryl, and a second. Thank you very much, Micah. This is a roll call vote.